If you are just starting to read classic literature or coming back after years off, what book should you read? Because starting to read classics is like starting a sport again or working out after years off. If you go too fast, then you may injure yourself. If you try to read Infinite Jest first, then there is going to be a chance that you burn out, fail, and return to not reading. And so my job here today is to give you 10 recommendations that are fun to read, won't take you long to read, and are also transformative. Because here on Right Conscious, I talk about the best books and authors of all time. I also help readers like you activate so that we can create a literary renaissance. And this video is also for seasoned readers because a huge part of creating a literary renaissance is increasing our ability to give really good book recommendations, because we've all been there before. We've been in that passionate state, and whether it's our spouse, our mom, our best friend, or whoever, we give a book recommendation and it falls flat. They never read it. They try to, and they can't get into it. And so all the books I'm going to be talking about today, I have given to, yes, hundreds of people. Reading books and talking about books have been my entire life, for my entire life. And for the past 8 years, I have been a high school English teacher and have had to try to convince a bunch of dopamine addicts to care about a lot of the books we're going to be talking about today. And so if you want to support my journey of being a cog in the wheel of the literary renaissance, then consider subscribing and leaving a like on the video. And so enough with this intro. Let's hop into our first book of the day, which is, of course, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. This novel has sold over 50 million copies since it was published over 103 years ago, if I remember correctly. And it has transformed millions of lives because so many of us in our Western conception of reality are missing out on Eastern modalities of thought. And I've always believed that Western and Eastern philosophy are just two pieces of a puzzle that when you put together can create explosions, not just in art, but in your personal life. Look what happened to the Beatles. They went from singing, "I wanna hold your hand," to taking some acid, meditating, then releasing Revolver, Abbey Road, Sgt. Pepper. The same goes with modernism. In the early 20th century, writers for the first time got a ton of access to Chinese poets and Eastern philosophy, and everything exploded. It's not a coincidence that philosophical fields like phenomenology, which is the study of consciousness, exploded because these philosophers got access to thousands of years of texts and wisdom that was all about the exploration of consciousness, which was grossly neglected over in Western civilization. And so Siddhartha is one of the easiest ways to reorient your Western conception of the world to Eastern modalities of thought without having to do the Hare Krishna chant, without having to hit a Trikonasana pose in yoga class or do breathing exercises or go join a cult. Siddhartha is a coming-of-age story through an Eastern lens. We all love coming-of-age stories. Lord of the Rings, Huck Finn, To Kill a Mockingbird. I have a top 10 list, if you look up Right Conscious, top coming-of-age novels, where I go into them. Most of them follow a pattern, though. And my cat Griselda has joined us, everyone. She just puked, and I think she's looking for some affection. But the technical term for a coming-of-age novel comes from the German word Bildungsroman. And funny enough, Hesse was a German author. And so German literature at this time was really into these coming-of-age novels. If you look at some of Hesse's other novels like Damien and some of that stuff, they follow more of the Western blueprint, Steppenwolf. But in this story, he reimagines the entire process from this Eastern way of thought, which in the end, in the East, a lot of the time, instead of trying to connect to God or the self, they are trying to connect to this form of oneness, the universe, the Pisces energy, whatever you want to call it. And so it's a different path and it's a different goal. And so Siddhartha follows a story that's loosely connected to the Buddha. If you know the story, the Buddha, he was a prince or some form of royalty and eventually gave all that up to seek this path of enlightenment. And this story follows a very similar path, but funny enough, Siddhartha in the story actually meets the Buddha and talks to him. And then Siddhartha's story takes a much different turn than the Buddha's actual story. And so this novel is really good to start with or give to someone because it helps reorient your purpose. It helps ground you and shed away a lot of the inauthenticity that we all have to experience in this world with having a profile, with having to project ourselves online in the various ways that we do, or, go to our bland job where we have to put on the mask. And so many people are devoid of purpose, of direction. And this novel doesn't tell you, like I said, to go meditate, to go do any of these actual things, but it shows you the template. It shows you a mindset that if you apply will radically change your life. I know it did for me when I was 13, and it has been the cornerstone of everything that I have built and deconstructed and moved throughout my entire life. And this book alone, my 8th grade teacher, Mr. Stewart, gave it to me, helped me get into literature, real literature, transformative things that can not only make me a better and more aware person, but also understand the importance of helping others and all this other cool stuff. And so this is a fast read. This shouldn't take you more than a couple hours to finish. You're going to be excited to see the process. It's a coming of age story. So, there's always something going on. There's different scenes of growth throughout the novel that you'll be captivated with. And then by the end, you're going to be so excited. You're going to be kind of sucked into this idea of oneness or this journey. And it's one of the better depictions of it in literature that I've ever seen because it isn't too complicated. I've seen many authors write hallucination scenes or integration scenes into the cosmic body or whatever, and it can become convoluted really fast and way too advanced really fast. I remember when I read this scene when I was 13 because I had never thought about this concept of oneness. Because in Western religion and all these things, it's about, going to heaven or, connecting with the one God and all these different things. But when I figured out about this unity vision, I remember sitting there understanding the entire book and then getting to, one of these nice passages of unity and being like, wow, I can't get this. I have no idea what this feels like. It was really weird for me. And at some level, my life has been a pursuit of that feeling ever since that moment. And so I highly recommend this book. If you are an advanced reader, this is a good one to read. This is a good one to knock off your list. German literature, especially in the early 20th century, was awesome. Hermann Hesse, Thomas Mann, those guys are OGs to the game. And if you want to read Hesse with me, the Right Conscious Book Club is the most active book club in the world. We read anywhere from 6 to 10 novels every single month. And all the way in the month of December, we are going to be reading a Hesse novel named Damien. This is a fire novel. I like it just as much as Siddhartha, and it's almost as accessible to read. Slightly harder, but I know all of you will be able to get through it. And with our 6 to 10 selections every single month that we meet up and talk about, there are novels for beginners and all the way up to the most advanced novels of all time. And so no matter where you are on the reading spectrum or what you are interested in reading, whether that's philosophy, sci-fi, westerns, literary fiction, classics, I have the ability to cover almost all of it because we read over 70 books a year over in my book club. And so if you also join, and the link is down in the description below, you get access to my literature courses where I teach you guys about literature, my writing courses, my own writing, and live streams, and a ton of other cool content. So if you want to support me and the channel, I would love to see you guys over there. And if not, your free support over here means a lot. I also have free content on Substack, over 15 hours of free content. And there you guys go. Let us move on now. Once again, the link is down in the description below if you are interested. So next we have some Japanese literature from Yukio Mishima. And if you don't know about Mishima, go read his biography. He is a wild guy. But The Sailor Who Fell from Grace from the Sea is one of the best kind of beginner Japanese novels that's also mind-blowing and nihilistic and odd and liberating and so many other things all at once. I mean, I have given this book to easily over 100 people or recommended this. I have read this with my classes before at my old school. I got the librarian to get us a class set, and my students loved it, and everyone who I've told about this novel has loved it. There's always a logic where like, this sucks. I didn't get it. This was boring. There's always that person. But in general, this has been very well received because books like Siddhartha are somewhat happy. Like there's pain and suffering and growth in these things. But The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea is an artistic exploration of life after World War II in Japan, but not on the level of talking about radical cultural changes or all that stuff, but through the viewpoint of a sailor and a young boy. the sailor longer wants to be a sailor and wants to reintegrate back into the world. He wants to leave this vision of purity and adventure he once had. And this collides with this young boy who is growing up with this very nihilistic view of the world. Because after Japan lost World War II and America came in, one of the things that was intensified was some of the darkness that Japan had been grappling with since it decided to become an industrial power. And one could say the darkness that all classic societies and individuals were dealing with until we kind of lifted ourselves up through education and consciousness. And because Japan went on this crazy nationalistic streak, a lot of that energy was put into the military and hatred of China and Korea and all these other countries. But what happened, what's interesting is that when Japan surrenders, unconditional surrender, okay, they're all good now. Look, they've conformed to MacArthur's capitalism, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, no, that energy has to go somewhere. That darkness has to go somewhere. And sadly, a lot of the time, it goes to the youth. You saw this in America with some of the radical stuff happening in American politics with the sons and daughters of veterans of World War II. These guys come back, they reintegrate into society. They say, okay, or they don't reintegrate. But just like Japan, a lot of these men say, okay, it's over now. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to suffer with PTSD and this stuff, even though they didn't know that it existed, and move on. But that darkness, that void, not just through their parenting style, but also in the philosophy of the country, affected the children. And that's what this novel is about. This novel features a group of 5 boys who want to desensitize themselves to everything. They have this Nietzschean, scientific, materialistic model of reality that isn't native to Japan that they are bringing to their little small town. And Mishima does a beautiful job of showing how it corrupts them, how it turns them into boys with odd fetishes and all this stuff. And it's not like overly descriptive or anything like that. You could give this to anyone and no one's going to think it's weird. But at a high level, that's what's going on here. It's a clash of this rise of pure objective thought with no ethics, and the decline of this dreaming mentality, of this old world coming of age adventurer mentality. And what happens when those collide, especially with someone writing it like Mishima, who was a radical in and of himself, what that does is give you a really good novel. This one is, once again, a fast read. It is a fun read. From the start, you're going to be like, WTF. It's got one of the better hooks that we're going to talk about throughout this entire series. And so that's why it's also really effective. Siddhartha somewhat starts slow, and you kind of go through this process, and it's cool. And it's not like off-putting. There's some novels that take 100 pages to get going. But this novel from the start is going to be like, who is this? And that is really important when you want momentum or you want to recommend a book to someone. And when it comes to classic literature, I view the cutoff date around 1950. But there are exceptions to that rule, because I think in 1951, Catcher in the Rye was published, which feels pretty classic. But in 1960, To Kill a Mockingbird was published, which already feels like it's in the classic American canon. And The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea was published in 1965. And so not the most classic novel, but it's not postmodernist. And because Mishima is such a fan of classic society and the old ways, it really shows in his work. And so moving on to our next book, let's of course talk about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And I just reread this for Guillermo del Toro's movie that is coming out this year on Netflix, which I am super pumped about. Everyone needs to read this before it hits the theaters in October, and then then on Netflix in November. So you still have some time. Anyway, if you've never read this before, it is a really good stepping stone to a lot of harder works, in classic literature. Shelley wrote this when she was pretty young, and that's not to discount her talent or the book at all. But it's not a meandering, technical Jane Austen novel. It's not long, and you will be surprised about how accessible the English is for being written in 1818. I remember I didn't read this until college, and I remember looking at the syllabus and all these, it was like some 19th century novel class, and I was like looking through some of the other books, and like the first 2 books we read in the class were like bleh, really like boring and the meandering in the Victorian style. But then I read this and I was like, oh my God, this feels like how people talk today. There aren't the same flourishes, and novelists back then didn't know all the same tricks we know now. But in general, this is one of the most influential novels of all time, and it's much different than the typical Frankenstein story that we're going to be presented. I can guarantee you right now that in the Guillermo del Toro movie that we're going to get, Victor isn't going to be fainting all the time. We're not going to get all the weird, idiosyncratic, sad boy, nervous energy that Victor actually is. We're not going to get the actual realistic details of what Victor was doing. For instance, in the movies, when we hear Frankenstein's castle, and he's got this castle and he's got this workshop and it's epic. If you've seen Young Frankenstein or Van Helsing or like any of the classic movies about Frankenstein, it's this huge deal. But in actuality, in the book, as you'll see, Victor has an apartment where he's doing all this at. And it's not even a nice apartment. He's a student. It's like your typical college town apartment. And so there are these little details that you will find that if you've just seen the movies, that actually aren't true. And you'll be shocked. I remember reading and being like, wow, I don't know when this narrative went wrong. I guess I don't understand the history of cinema or theater enough and haven't looked into it enough. But I just looked it up and it said that it was like that from the start. The early stage adaptations in the 1820s had taken this idea of the tower and stuff. Anyway, what makes this transformative for me is I feel like it's a manifesto on responsibility. And to me, I interpret it as creative responsibility. That as artists, as thinkers, once you go down this road of truth or art and you turn your back to it, you give up on it, you start moving into superficial stuff or doing it for money, it is a net negative on your life. It will eventually come back to get you. It will haunt you. When you reject your actual true essence, your true creativity, many of these things, especially once you've put it out into the world and seen what it is, it will follow you for the rest of your life. And I'll dive deeper into that theory in another video, but it's just sad, you guys. As someone who's now in my 30s, I've been writing since I was 14. I've been involved with art and trying to create a literary renaissance and convince people to read since I was that age. And I've known so many people who were readers and given up on it. And their reality, most of the time, is much darker than the people who just decided to remain NPCs and just go on staying normal. Once you get this information, once you see it, once you start creating with it, once you start merging with the ether, your higher self, if you're an atheist, whatever, God, it's a door you really can't shut. And so it's also a tale of warning. I have a friend who, I think because all of us were creative in my group and like trying to do things, he thought that he needed to be, and he really tried to bring that out, and for years and years toiled away. And then after years of doing that, realized that really wasn't the path for him. And it took him about another 8 or 9 years to put the genie back in the bottle. And now I would say he's living somewhat of a normal life. He has been able to pull it back together, but it's a lot of wasted time, you guys. And so if you're going to walk this path, and if you were reading this and you were planning to write and share your thoughts and actually interact and integrate with literature and let it change you, then it's not simple. How many people have gone wrong with knowledge and literature and philosophy? Countless. This stuff doesn't automatically make you a better person. You're literally given the keys of a Ferrari, and you could either choose to stay in control or think that you're really good at driving and then eventually crash. And so there you go. Or switch it out for the minivan and have to live with that reality for the rest of your life. And so I 100% recommend this. This is a little bit harder of a cut than Siddhartha and The Sailor Who Fell from Grace from the Sea in terms of recommending it to other people. But for those of you guys out there who want something to read personally and you haven't crossed this off your list yet, you need to, especially by November. You will appreciate the movie more. I feel like Guillermo del Toro, when he's at his best, can tap into that genius energy, and I'm really excited to see what he does with this. And I won't trust the previews or any other weird things I see until I see it in totality for myself. And so next we have Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and this is an absolutely fire book. I think this may be the shortest one that we've talked about so far today by far. I think it's under 100 pages. You could read this in one sitting if you wanted to. And what's so interesting about this book is that yesterday, in the Right Conscious Book Club, we talked about Anna Karenina, which is, I think, 800 or 900 pages. And Tolstoy wrote that a couple days before he wrote The Death of Ivan Ilyich. The same is true with War and Peace, which is this massive novel. And I would say that War and Peace and Anna Karenina are some of the most transformative novels of all time. But Tolstoy had this crisis later in his life. And you could read about this in his nonfiction memoir, A Confession, which we are reading in the book club, I think, in January of 2020. 2026 if you guys want to come and talk about it. But he had this basically spiritual conversion and went deeper into Christianity in the sense that he felt bad about having all this land and being rich and making art for aesthetics, and instead went on this kind of polemical run where he was attacking all these classic authors and musicians and contemporaries, and decided to try to write works that anyone could read and that would be transformative, which is a really interesting ask, because he went from writing masterpieces to saying, I'm not even going to hide this stuff. I'm not even going to hide my approach and what I'm doing, which is kind of the classic way, right? On this channel all the time, I talk about how transformative literature is you take this big theme, you take all these unconscious symbols, all these things, and you try to hide it as much as you can so you don't preach to the audience, because people hate that. But The Death of Ivan Ilyich isn't really preaching, and it's not really unconscious transformation either. It's a simple book that hits hard. This novel is about a man, Ivan Ilyich, who is dying. You know, we know at the very start of the novel that he's dead, and we basically get to see his downfall and his thoughts all the way until his dying moment. And when it comes from someone like Tolstoy, who especially in this moment was focused and activated on this idea of talking about death and life after death and living authentically and living, for higher principles and all these things, this thing is written almost perfectly. It is a masterclass in writing. I feel like this is a book that anyone can finish and everyone should read. This book should be recommended to everyone. This is a really fun book to talk about with others and really just focus on your worldview with. Tolstoy isn't preaching to you. He's not saying that you need to become a Christian or these things. What Tolstoy is advocating for is that you need to take responsibility for your life and care about things that actually matter. And this is the type of book that will activate you to care about those things, because we all know we should care about spending time with our family more, or meditation, or going to church, or charity, or like all these different things. But almost none of you guys, including myself, are doing it. We are inconsistent. We fall off the board. We focus on fantasy football or whatever drama is going on, or our addictions, or our favorite distractions, instead of focusing on those things. And what I like about this is that this amplifies why you should take that seriously. But no matter what you believe, whether you are like a hardcore Muslim or an atheist or whatever, this will amplify your best qualities. I cannot see this novel really being twisted into something that it's not. Mishima's novels are all the time. Even books like Siddhartha, Frankenstein, you can twist them. But this one is very straightforward, and Tolstoy basically makes it pretty matter of fact. I think that's really respectable. That's something that I don't think he gets enough credit for with this book, because we had this Anna Karenina book club yesterday, and there were wide-ranging opinions. I loved it, I hated it, blah, 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 blah. But I did a book club for The Death of Ivan Ilyich. It was very focused, very centered, we were just immediately talking about the most important thing. And so I think that that's a real accomplishment to be able to do that, because a lot of the time, if you create a piece of art, or you have a philosophy, or you're engaging in trying to transform other people, sometimes it can swing the other way. One of my favorite examples of this is that back when I was 19 or 20, I was really into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I lived in Las Vegas, fight capital of the world, and I was training twice a day, 6 days a week, with people that would become world champions, and just really focusing a couple years of my life on martial arts while still kind of going to school and, focusing, and just, I was really into martial arts. And so I'd always, because of actually Siddhartha, been into yoga, so I was pretty flexible. Then when I realized that flexibility in jiu-jitsu was really good for not getting your guard pass, I really started focusing on yoga in my off time. And I got I went to yoga teacher training, did all this stuff. And so a fellow student one time, who was probably like 6 years older than me, I'm going to say he was 25 or 26, came up to me, he's like, hey, can you teach me yoga? And back then I had all the time in the world. I was like, yeah. Now, next time I'm doing yoga at the park, come with me. So he started coming to the park with me and doing yoga with me. And I was showing him like all the secret stuff. Like, I was really into yoga. I mean, I still am. But I studied it extensively. I traveled to different parts of the world to study it. I feel like I had some really cool stuff that, especially back then, was really underground back in 2013. And probably still is. But anyway, I showed him all this mind-blowing stuff. Then I leave for a month to go visit family during the summer, because the summer in Las Vegas is terrible. So I was up in Utah, Wyoming, hanging out with all them. Then I come back and he tells me, well, he doesn't tell me. I hear from other people that he started dating this 16-year-old at our gym, and then the age of consent in Las Vegas is 16. I'm like, what? And this is a girl that I knew, for years, who was training, since I was there for probably 3 years with her. And I was kind of like, what? And then obviously the relationship didn't last and like things broke down. And by the time I got back, he wasn't at the gym anymore because he got shamed out of it. But eventually I heard from her father that how he started to connect with her was through yoga. And then I put the pieces together that he basically manipulated her with all the information I gave him. And so that's an instance of trying to help someone. And like this guy had a lot of problems. I was like, dude, you really need yoga. You have all these issues, where I should have occulted or hermeticized that information and held it back. This is why monks, you just couldn't get accepted to a lot of these really good ashrams or monasteries, whether in the East or the West. You had to go through a deep multi-year initiation before you got any information. Now that isn't the case. And with our irony-filled culture, our culture that makes everything ironic, we've basically flattened all forms of useful information. On top of that, we also, as readers, sometimes take a book and turn it into our own thing, manipulate the text. This is what somewhat happened with Nietzsche and the Nazis and other people in the 20th century. If you've ever read Nietzsche deeply, he would not have been in support of that. And he was actually speaking to a much different idea than what it got turned into by these totalitarian regimes. But for whatever reason, this novel, more so than any I've ever read, stands up to random interpretation, which is, like I said, really awesome. Because you can get to the core of something. Because if you have a book, let's say, and you give it to a friend and you talk about it, well, what if you have these varying interpretations? But what if you both had to confront the most important thing in the world, which is death? And you could do that with almost anyone. That's what this novel unlocks for you. And it's funny that Tolstoy was able to do this, because the Tolstoy crowd, from what I've noticed on my time here on BookTube, is the wildest of everybody. I get emails and messages and comments all the time talking about how I've corrupted Tolstoy's work, or the literary renaissance isn't standing up to the Tolstoyan ideal, and all this stuff. It's so funny. And excuse me. So for sure, check this one out. Recommend it to somebody else. And let's move on now to our next book. So next we have Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And I don't know if I've ever talked about this book on this channel, but I read this with one of my classes last year, and everyone loved it. This is an awesome story. And what makes this a really strong recommendation is that there are so many adaptions that you can watch to really fuel your interest in this entire world. First of all, there is a prequel to Treasure Island called Black Sails, which is one of the sickest shows created in the last 15 years. Real boat action, pirates, the Caribbean, crazy memorable characters. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean on steroids. It's such a good show. I am a huge fan of it. And you also have Muppet Treasure Island, which is the best Muppet movie of all time, and Treasure Planet, which is, I think, Disney's remake of this in kind of a steampunk fashion. And all three of these versions Black Sails is a really good prequel and basically has all the characters, but reading the book is a good idea because it is somewhat different than a lot of the adaptions. But once you have the core story, you will fall in love with it. And from what I've been able to tell with my students and myself and people I know, it's very rare that someone doesn't care about this world. I guess someone could say it's very male-centric because it's a bunch of pirates, but Black Sails has some really strong female characters. And who doesn't love pirates? Like, Pirates of the Caribbean is one of the highest grossing movie series of all time, but I feel like after the second movie, it really started to slide, and by the third and fourth movie, it was like in a total free fall. But that just signals to me that everyone loves pirates. This novel is really short. It has a great hook. We're looking for Captain Flint's treasure. We're on this pirate ship on this normal ship that gets taken over by pirates. And so this novel, even though many of us read this as a kid, isn't just children's literature. It is something that you can get into and can make you kind of question some morality and some other cool things. And then with some of the other adaptions, you can really dive into some of these ideas. And so this may be the most fun book I've recommended so far. This is something you should give to your kids, get them into it. Like I said, there's payoffs at the end. And this is the axiomatic foundation of pirate culture, treasure maps, marked with an X, parrots on the shoulder, sea shanties, pirates on crutches. Like, even though all those existed, obviously, this novel really brought that forth into the culture. So next on our list, and actually our next two selections are by female authors, but have modern literary companions that are more like odd deep dives into the same story. So we have Kate Chopin's The Awakening, which comes in at only 100 pages. This is once again a book that you can read really fast. And so this is what many would call an early feminist text. And I know some people out there will kind of roll their eyes when they hear that, but you have to realize that women were basically contained, unless they were aristocrats, and even then they were, for basically all of time, unless they were in this odd offshoot pagan society, in the sense that they couldn't explore the world, think, act the way that they wanted to, especially in relation to men. And we can get into all that later. But this is kind of one of these early explorations of a woman kind of not just like doing this wanderlust, eat, pray, love, I'm going to go find my freedom and be narcissistic type story, but a woman who goes on this vacation to the sea, and the sea awakens her. The sea kind of opens this portal of freedom for her. And this novel is a tragedy, and, kind of all this aftermath happens, because what happens when you have this awakening? We've maybe had some of these before. In Eastern philosophy, they are called Satori awakenings, where you have this kind of instant awakening, or one that happens really fast. And how do you grapple with that? And a lot of times in life, this leads to people having a lot of problems, going to divorces, quitting their jobs, having this instability. And this novel is a really good kind of exploration of one of these awakenings, especially from the point of view of a woman, which for everyone is actually highly effective, because what people don't realize is that at the turn of the century, of the 20th century, 1900s, lower class individuals and even middle class individuals were becoming literate for the first time and being educated. Women, minorities all across the world, were being lifted into like consciousness and being able to think deeply and contemplate themselves. And like that created a lot of problems, but that's why that's some of the best literature in the world, because there are all these awakenings happening. And out of that entire group though, women, which make up 50% of the population and are actually more emotional than men in terms of the depths that they can explore in general, obviously there are very talented emotional men also. What does that look like? And it's almost a gift that we have a lot of these texts to show this flowering. And so I recommend this one. This one is a fast read, and one of our best modern authors right now, Robert Stone, who died back in 2015, but his books are still really relevant, wrote this book called Children of Light. And it's about this playwright named Gordon Walker, who wrote an adaptation to The Awakening. And they're in Mexico filming it, where a lot of this novel takes place, anyway. And I don't want to spoil too much. And he has this borderline, the main actress who used to have a fling with has borderline personality and is like super paranoid and schizophrenic. And during this filming, she goes off her medication, and her goal is to actually embody the character. And I won't spoil what happens, but after you read this and you see what happens in this, you're like, oh my God, she's trying to do that. And so this is a really good kind of modern telling that is a critique of Hollywood and film and even pharmaceutical drugs and so many other things. And once you get into Robert Stone, some of his novels, I haven't really talked about him very much. This novel's really good. Dog Soldiers and another that's slipping my mind that I've read are all really good reads. And he's one of the better contemporary authors that is on par with the Morrisons, the McCarthys, the DeLillos, the Pynchons, whoever, depending on how you look at it. And so this is a really cool combination of novels that aren't hard to read. So this is 100 pages, and Children of Light is only 250 pages. And so this is a really good 1-2 punch that can make you feel like, wow, I actually did something important with my time, and I got some really good momentum and got exposed to a classic novel and kind of a literary fiction staple of the last 30 years or so. And so now moving on to a similar combo, which is Jane Eyre and Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. I feel like the godfather right now with Griselda. But Jane Eyre somewhat breaks from the model I've been talking about in this presentation, because Jane Eyre is like a 500-page book. And the only reason I am recommending it is because I think that Jean Rhys is one of the best female novelists of the 20th century. And she wrote a prequel to Jane Eyre that's this novel over here that's only 160 pages. We are actually going to be reading this in December in the Right Conscious Book Club if you want to read it and come and talk about it with us. But it's a really good prequel. It's a really good book as just a standalone text. And in my opinion, and we'll talk about Jane Eyre in a second, if you don't have time to read a 500-page novel right now, you could still be immersed in the classics and discover a 20th century author that's somewhat unknown and not talked about enough, and either read the book Wide Sargasso Sea, then watch an adaptation of Jane Eyre, or watch an adaptation of Jane Eyre, then read the book. Wide Sargasso Sea, whatever. But I wouldn't say that you are a cheater or you are missing out on some crazy experience if you do that, because like I said, it's about getting immersed in the classics. It's instead of watching the new Superman movie or a Quentin Tarantino movie, which I'm sure are, I like Quentin Tarantino and maybe the Superman movie is good. Instead of doing that, you could be involved in a period piece, in something older. And if you really like the story, you can always circle back at a later time and read Jane Eyre properly. I will say, though, that Jane Eyre feels very modern. For being written in 1850, it's very much like Mary Shelley. It's dramatic, like you can connect with all the characters, and it's a page turner. Like the 500 pages won't feel hard. I would say that another novel that's somewhat similar to the last two I've talked about, that's also lengthy, but if you have momentum and you feel like you want to finish a classic novel, is Little Women, which is also a really good story, an awesome classic, and has some decent adaptations. And as you can see, a lot of the things I'm talking about when it comes to getting momentum and getting over the hump have either a social or artistic component to it. If you read Treasure Island, you get to watch a really cool show and know all the characters already. If you read Siddhartha, you get to understand, you get opened up to Eastern philosophy. And so a lot of the time, just pure intrinsic motivation, especially if you're getting back into something, can work for some people. And we should, some people say, if people aren't willing to do it, then having all these other motivational or accountability factors is just cheating. But in general, when it comes to diet or all these things, it's also a social experience. It's much easier if your partner or your family are supportive of what you are doing or actually do it with you. And so moving on to our next novel, and that is The Stranger. And The Stranger is the existentialist classic. It is one of the lit bro classics. If you read this, the only social adaptation that you will get is a really cool song by The Cure called Killing an Arab. But this novel, once again, is a fast read. It is something that you can do in one sitting or in an afternoon easily. This story tells about a pretty flat character who is written intentionally flat, who is not very emotional, named Merceau, who is somewhat just disconnected from the world. Doesn't care about his mom dying, doesn't care about women, is just there to live and have some pleasure. But a set of circumstances kind of take him down a darker road and really creates a opportunity for Camus to explore how an existentialist mindset would look if applied wholeheartedly to this reality. And it's kind of a tragic experience. And having known many people who have fallen into this mindset, a lot of the time it doesn't end well. And if you are watching this still, you are probably a beginner. And so what is existentialism? I will give you a 25-second answer. And so existentialists believe that existence precedes essence, that we are not fixed by nature. We are not born violent by design. We exist, and then we define ourselves in our reality and who we are through our choices and our actions. There is no blueprint in our biology, by culture, by God, or anybody else. And because there is no fixed essence or responsibility, then we have to take our own personal responsibility, and freedom into our own hands. But this isn't necessarily a happy thing. When we think of being free, it's this positive thing. But Plato once said that the people in the societies that tried to become the most free actually become the most enslaved. And Jean-Paul Sartre, who is one of the famous existentialists, said that, he called this the burden of freedom. And this is kind of the burden of attaining consciousness in the 20th century, en masse, that we have this burden of awareness that many of you guys have experienced before in an existential crisis or a panic attack or late night thoughts, the dark night of the soul, whatever. And because we are all searching for meaning through God, through culture, and God is silent, we realize that life has no inherent meaning, like I just said before. And when we realize that, we have to confront the absurdity of this situation. And through the confrontation of absurdity, we are liberated. But only usually if we revolt. So I will cap myself there. But this is a must read, everyone. If you are still listening to this and you have not read The Stranger yet, this is a novel that you could talk about with so many other people and has been so influential on so many films, movies, music, so many figures in the world. This one I would say is probably in the tens of millions in terms of influence, if not way higher. Camus is also good because he can actually get you into philosophy. For instance, his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, and some of his other essays and thoughts and just reading about his life is a good kind of gateway into contemplating Western philosophy, especially Western philosophy in the 20th century. And that's what he honestly was for me, after exploring him and Nietzsche and other people. Then I, went back to the Greeks and all this stuff. But if it wasn't for him, I maybe would have never gotten into it. And I know so many people, being a high school teacher, who have confronted Camus and, gone on a rich journey of self-education, which is what keeping momentum is about, which is what video is here to help you do. So next on the list, we have Notes from the Underground. And this one is a little bit more advanced. Like Dostoevsky isn't necessarily really hard to read. And there'll be some bro in the chat right now like, Dostoevsky is so easy to read. I took AP English. I'm a little genius. But in general, he has somewhat of a classic style. And this novel is about a man named the Underground Man. And for the first half of the novel, it's just about him meandering and talking about his toothache and why he's such a bad person and all these things. And it's this great exploration, and it's really important into this idea, into this proto-existentialist idea, into this idea of becoming too conscious, this idea that consciousness is a curse that is so important in 20th century literature, because that's one of the reasons why we read the classics, is because it gives us a great preview to the ideas that we all now think are really normal. We see some of the greatest thinkers of all time grappling with ideas that are very new to civilization. And a lot of the time, their rawness, how they approach it, is much more fresh than the flattened out version we have now, because our version of reality, your philosophy is actually not unique, Like a lot of people, like when I used to be into yoga, had this like neo-Kantian idea toward reality. And they had no idea who Kant was. But if you went back 70 years ago and talked about those ideas to random people, even hippies or more eccentric people, they wouldn't be able to get it. They would think it would be crazy. But those ideas have been commodified, flattened, and mainstreamed for the average population. And many of these ideas explored in Notes from the Underground have too. But when you read the classics, you get the OG version. You get something that hasn't had everything stripped away yet, which is so important to me, at least, because during that process of flattening, so many of the most important parts of archetypal exploration, which is one of the best parts of reading novels, being able to explore different sides of yourself and imagine yourself in different situations, which is actually kind of a psychological idea that the psychotherapist Carl Jung came up with, called active imagination, like imagining yourself running through these archetypes so that you can live them out, because maybe you can't live out the life of the outlaw or the tyrant in your objective personal life, but in dreams and daydreams you can, and through reading novels you can too. And so I believe that trying to get to the source of a lot of these archetypes is really, really important, because it enables you to help explore yourself further. And so this novel is for you when you are ready to graduate to harder stuff. Like, for instance, if you want to read Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, or The Brothers Karamazov, or Anna Karenina, or some of these novels that are a step up, then Notes from the Underground is a really good place to start. I had over in the Right Conscious Substack, I don't remember the exact ordering right now, but I took beginners, and I do this occasionally. We'll do this again in 2026. I took beginners through a process to help activate them through literature. And I think we started off with like Siddhartha, The Stranger, A Man Who Fell from Grace from the Sea, Notes from the Underground, then read like Crime and Punishment or some other larger work. I gave some options. And everyone who went through the process of reading those 5 books absolutely loved it. It was a really good course and model of exploring some of the darker elements of 20th century art and thought without getting into like horror or anything too crazy, like just actual existential thought, exploring Nietzsche's ideas, a blend of Eastern ideas and all that. I think that that's like, if you for the highest bang for your buck at the start of your reading or knowledge journey, if you could get into that, it will make interpreting life and tragedy and other art and works and seeing where we are now so much easier. Because if not, then you may, like I said, get sucked into some odd rabbit hole that is really niche or too violent or too odd. Because the violence isn't what matters. Like, that's just shock jockeying. That's just a quick thrill or experience. It's not about mentally ill people or any of that. It's how we got there, how these people think, their aspirations, their pitfalls, the journey, and not focusing necessarily, on outliers, but actual people like you and I, people that we know. Many novels, many movies, these crazy things are going on. But I know so many people that are like the underground man. I know so many people who are like Raskolnikov in this book. I know so many people who are like Merceau. I know so many people like the main characters in The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. And I also know so many people who are striving for something like what is displayed in Siddhartha. And so it's really important to get that down because it will prevent you from falling into this rabbit hole. You know, a lot of these books are exploring the common pitfalls of darkness, of existentialism that so many thinkers and feelers out there fall into. And I don't want you to fall into that. Don't become the underground man. And if you do, then just do it for a short period of time, but always have a way out. So next on the list, we have Infinite Jest, just joking. So for our capstone piece, we have The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. This is, once again, a really, really fast read. But this one has a core teaching to it that anyone can learn from. If you want to get into the works of Ernest Hemingway, which is actually a portal into modernism, Ernest Hemingway was friends with so many of the famous modernist writers, Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Henry Miller. I could just go on and on, other novelists. He was so influential. And early modernist writing, whether it's European and American, will also be a great gateway, into Japanese modernism and all these other things. And if you don't know what modernism is, it's kind of what came out of the Victorian era. We had all this rigidity, and modernism started getting into poetry that was free verse and started to integrate this new world. You know, I was just talking about this awakening into consciousness, and that's what modernism is really exploring, consciousness. And this new world where we all can be conscious, you know. And, you know, I could go into definitions, but The Old Man and the Sea is a great modernist work, and Hemingway is a great modernist writer. Some people may feel like he's bland and you have to know how to read him, but this novel could be interpreted 20 different ways. I went to the Hemingway conference a couple years ago in Cook City, Montana, Cody, Wyoming, other places, and I heard a couple presentations on this book and they were just wild, you know, across the map. And so that's really fun. But I've given this book to hundreds of people. I've done this in my class so many times. And I used to run a boys book club for only boys before that got shut down because it wasn't gender inclusive. That was so funny. But all the kids loved this novel. You know, I used to work at an inner city school in Las Vegas, and I just remember this kid named Joseph, who was a total thug. You know, he failed my class, failing all his classes, getting in fights, gang banging. But for whatever reason, I said, hey, you should read this. And he read it and absolutely loved it. And then it basically started a relationship between him and I where he wasn't doing his work in class or caring about anything related to school. But I got him to read 4 or 5 books that were like this. He was like, oh, he read Siddhartha, he read a couple others. And it was like, wow. And I saw him like 2 years later at a gas station at like 1 a.m. when I was like, I'll just say I was super baked. I was like, Joseph. And then, you know, we talked about The Old Man and the Sea literally at 1 a.m. And he was anyway, I won't talk about him, but yeah, really nice guy. But he was affected by this book. And that to me is like, wow. I can't tell you how many kids I could say tricked into reading this book. You know, in my classes, I do this process where the kids come in and do the dumb bell ringer on the board or whatever because it's a state mandate, and then they write for 10 minutes. So we do 10 minutes of free writing, right? Whatever you want. Then they read their own book for 10 minutes. And so there's always some fucking kid, you know, there's always, oh, I don't have a book. I don't know what book to read. So I have like 30 copies of The Old Man and the Sea that I've accumulated to get, okay, read this. And then I basically take them through a very similar process that's, you know, tweaked of what I just told you guys. And some of them that are just baked or on Red Dead 40 or have been traumatized by their parents, they don't do it. They don't care. They don't get through any of it. But at minimum, they get through this book. Like sometimes it will take them 4 months of reading 10 minutes a day, if not 5 months, an entire semester to finish, but they finish it. And I found it's one of the only books I can get people through, especially boys. And so that's something to think about. You haven't read this yet. This is a great one to read, great one to be able to talk about with others. And like I said, there's actually a lot of deep metaphysical and content just about life in it. And so there you guys go. If you guys are interested in reading books with me, talking to me about books, my book club is the place for that. I consider it not a place for experts, but for people to practice talking about books. What's crazy is that most people who read books never talk about books. And if you don't talk about books or a topic, then you're actually kind of fumbly about it. Have you ever tried? I gotta throw my cat off right now. It's starting to hurt me. You ever try to talk to someone about something you care about, but maybe it's the first time you've done it and you fumble around a little bit and it doesn't go well? Well, that's how a lot of people are with books. Talking in general is a skill, but talking about certain books is also a skill. And so the more you do it, then when that opportunity does come and someone is maybe ready, then you can really sell them on it. Just 2 days ago, I sold someone on Blood Meridian, and I got a message today on my email because I don't use a phone. He's like, bro, this book is crazy. But it was, I have a daughter that's under a year old, and we go to these kids groups or whatever with other little kids, and we talk to the parents and chum it up or whatever. And one of these kids had a party, and then I went to the party and was talking to the dads, and me, I lured them into talking about World War II and all this other stuff. They were talking about football. I was like, no, let's talk about Japan. But then at some point I was talking to this one guy, and I got him to buy Blood Meridian. I was like, dude, you got to get it right now. I promise you, if you like the Comanches and Indians, dude. And I got the message today. But I've literally practiced probably more than any other human selling that book to people. And so that's a part of this process too, because even if you are a beginner, a year from now, you're going to be at a different level of reading, and you need to bring people along. All we have to do to create a literary renaissance, everyone, is create 10 million new readers. If we create 10 million new readers that buy one book per month from a new author that's actually good, that would immediately create thousands of new full-time authors. Imagine that, you guys. That's such a big opportunity. And we could get there like that. We're right there. Even if we just converted the existing readers to buying one book by modern authors a month, we could do that. But that is for a different video. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for all the support. I love each and every one of you guys, and I will see you very, very soon in the next video.